I'm going to Greece, to the Rhodes Island. I even hadn't visited an embassy or a visa centrum as I did before, and it was much quicker to organize the trip.
Alexandra is one of thousands of Ukrainians traveling to Europe without a visa for the first time in the country's history.
We all were waiting for that for a long time, and not only because the traveling became easier, but also going more far from Russia and coming closer to the place where we want to belong.
Trains like this one to Poland are now fully booked. All passengers traveling without visas need biometric passports and are only allowed a short stay for leisure or business. But they are the lucky few. A recent poll found that 70% of Ukrainians don't plan to use the visa-free regime at all in the next year because they can't afford to travel abroad. Ukraine's currency is weak. Incomes and pensions have shrunk. And according to UN data, nearly 60% of Ukrainians live below the poverty line.
If we really would like to have Ukrainians as a proper, so to say, people assimilated to the European community, we need dramatically increase their income and purchasing ability.
For the government in Kiev, this was a milestone worth celebrating. A reward for 3 years of EU-prescribed reforms and resistance from some member countries wary of opening the bloc's borders to Ukraine.
Сказати, що чим більший прогрес ми демонструємо на шляху реформ, тим більше аргументів в мене і в українського народу з'являється для того, щоб надати Україні і перспективу членства в Європейському Союзі.
Ukraine has come a long way since the Maidan protests in 2014, which demanded an end to corruption and political ties to Russia. Ukraine's new anti-corruption bureau has been hard at work, exposing dozens of officials. Public workers are now required to declare their wealth online. But critics say some politicians are trying to water down reforms. Recently, lawmakers passed an amendment that requires NGOs, activists, and journalists to also declare their assets.
Our elites are still linked with those style of governance. They are still linked with oligarchs. Formally, we are much more closer to Europe, but we have still these links not to Russia, but to Russian style of governance. And I hope the president someday will cut these links also.
Like the Soviet statue that towers over Kiev, Mother Russia is still a powerful presence. Many are wary of drawing closer to the EU in favor of abandoning Ukraine's other neighbor.
Ukraine is located between two superstates. We need to be pragmatic about what's best for our national interest. Of course, the EU and the US are important partners. So is China, Turkey, and Russia. They will not disappear from the world map. We need to build relations with all of them.
At Kiev's central station, the train from Poland has returned. Travelers say the visa-free system works well.
It's in Ukrainian that you are the passenger of the first visa-free train. And I think that everyone will remember this day because it's like a historic day for Ukrainians.
Of course, full membership to the EU is Ukraine's ultimate destination. But with a war to the east and an ongoing battle against corrupt elites, that journey will take far longer. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers in Kiev.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now by Emre Gurnin. He is an expert on Turkey-EU relations. From Kiev, Ivana Klimpush-Tsintsatse, the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine on European integration. And from Girne in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, Nikolai Gorshkov. He's the Director and Editor-in-Chief at Sputnik News UK. Thanks all of you for joining us. Ivana, if I may begin with you, you must be happy. This is possibly a step closer to EU accession. But if I can point you towards what your president Poroshenko said. He said, this is the fall of the paper curtain. This is the final break with the Russian Empire. And then he quoted the 19th century poet Lermontov, and he said, farewell, unwashed Russia. Was that language helpful, ma'am?
Well, first and foremost, we have to understand that what we finally received as a visa-free regime with the European Union, this is because we, as Ukrainians, as the Ukrainian state, governments, parliament, the president, civil society, media, we have all worked together in order to fulfill all of 144 provisions of the Visa Liberalization Action Plan. And that means that we finally actually leapfrogged much further than anybody could have expected. But back in 2014, when we were out in the Maidan fighting the previous regime in Kiev of former President Yanukovych. So therefore, I totally believe that this decision of the European Union is helping us to ensure that European integration of Ukraine is non-reversible, and that we are finally breaking with our colonial past of the Soviet Union and of the Russian Federation, which is trying to impose its, project its power over Ukraine and cannot let us go. And unfortunately, it's doing so also by illegally annexing Crimea and also by aggressively attacking Ukraine in the east by providing weapons, providing regular forces to the east of Ukraine and shells, and ensuring that the people of Ukraine are not safe on that territory.
Right, and you brought about the context quite well as to why it seems as if the Ukrainian president is thumbing his nose at the Russians. Nikolai Gorshkov, with this visa-free travel for Ukrainians into the EU, do they deserve it?
Well, every nation deserves a visa-free travel. The world should be a lot freer, and government state boundaries are basically an invention which wasn't there in all the days.
Okay, so let me ask you if it's a good thing.
It is a good thing for family travel, for tourism, for meeting friends, but I'm afraid for the way the Ukrainians understand visa-free travel, a lot of them, is for doing work in the EU, because the jobs in Ukraine are far and few between, and a lot of people have already been traveling to Europe as tourists and staying after their visas expired and working illegally and not paying taxes. It's a huge problem for Ukraine and for Moldova, for example, their nearest neighbor, that the jobs are not available in the countries and they're looking for every opportunity to work abroad. And that's what I think. Neither, there is a difference of opinion. The European Union believes it's a step forward in integrating Ukraine, but the Ukrainians believe it's an opportunity to get jobs in the West.
So let's ask Ivana. Ivana, for those Ukrainians who think they can get a job in Europe, now they can't, are they going to misread the situation and go and conduct illegal sort of employment activity, thinking that they can go to Europe now and find work?
No, I am absolutely sure that Ukrainians will be absolutely responsible travelers and will not be violating the visa-free regime provisions. And Ukrainian government, as well as our partners in the civil society, we are taking a very clear action to ensure that we have the information on the rules and procedures of using visa-free for Ukrainians being very clearly explained to every single Ukrainian citizen. And everybody knows very well that they can use visa-free specifically for tourism, for private visits, for B2B contacts, and we have to understand that this is also really increasing like business-to-business contacts, because now you don't have to stand in long lines and together all this huge piles of documents that you were supposed to do before applying for visa in any of the EU states and going to visa center. Now you can actually actually have the reason to go and for some conference, for some exhibition, to meet your partners, for negotiations to meet your partners, and actually just having your biometrical passport and having a reason why you are going and where you are going. And so I do not expect that there will be a flow of incoming Ukrainians that would be trying to violate these provisions.
Right. Good point. Let's bring in Emre Gönen as we broaden this out.
Yeah.
How does Turkey view this? First Georgia, now Ukraine, and you guys have been, I don't know, asking the father for a date for his daughter, you know, for years, and suddenly the father's marrying off the other girls, but wouldn't even give you a date with the other daughter.
I do not know. I have spent my youth as a university student in France, where Turkish nationals did not need any visa to travel within Europe. The only visas we needed were the ex-socialist countries. And the whole thing has changed starting from 1979. Because Turkish governments at that time wanted to get some control on the part of the European countries. Turkey was in a very dire situation regarding urban terrorism and everything. And this visa requirement stayed there. It stayed there. It should have been lifted by the year 2004, when the European Union Council of Ministers took the decision that Turkey was fulfilling the criteria for democratic countries, and accession negotiations had a green light to go. Usually it's a gesture. It's a gesture of the European Union, as it has been conveyed to Georgia and then to Ukraine. It's a goodwill gesture, you know, to offer some, how would I say, incentive for countries who are getting closer to the European Union. It's not the first step of the European membership. And I would remind the example of Turkey to all the other candidate countries. It's not an easy thing to join the European Union as a full member, especially in the present state of the conditions. But with Turkey, the whole thing has turned into a very sour discussion, tit-for-tat negotiation. And we have been offered so many times against other issues this visa-free travel right, and it is still pending.
Maybe you should have still been fighting with Russia.
Turkey has been fighting, I believe, 9 wars with the Russian Empire under the Ottoman Empire. We have won one, and there was one draw. So,
okay. But do you believe, I mean, the point I'm getting to is, do you believe that the others jumped ahead of the queue because it was political rather than actually weighing up who was a better candidate country?
Obviously, but everybody has jumped in front of Turkey within the queue regarding accession negotiations, regarding just anything.
Okay, so as I take that point and I pose it to Nikolai, Nikolai, is that the Russian perspective, that EU accession for the likes of Georgia and Ukraine is merely political and has nothing to do with economic, labor, legal reform and so on? Nikolai?
Yes, it is. It is political. Just look at the things as they stand. Yeah, Ukraine has leapfrogged to the visa-free regime, but it leapfrogged all the problems: corruption, lack of jobs, economic decline, lack of human rights, the anti-terrorist operation, which is branding about 5 million people in the east of Ukraine terrorists, all sorts of things. And the European Union wanted to give President Poroshenko a break from all the criticism he's getting at home, but also to snub Russia. So it's a kind of a two-pronged operation to show Russia a one-up thing, but also to help Poroshenko to give something to the people of Ukraine, because he can't do anything else.
Ivana, you're shaking your head in disagreement. Tell me why.
Well, first and foremost, because you're putting me on air with the representative of Sputnik, and according to even President of France, Macron, this is not a representative of the media, but this is a representative of propaganda, and I totally agree with President of France here. That's one thing. And definitely their messages would be trying to twist the reality, not really knowing what's exactly happening here in Ukraine.
Is he accurately representing the zeitgeist in Russia?
Let me finish this.
Okay.
If it was a political decision, we would have received this political decision without implementing 144 provisions of the Visa Liberalization Action Plan. It was not easy. It's not that it was an easy ride or, a free ride. No, Ukraine is actually earning every single decision by the actions, but we are taking these actions specifically back home because we want to make sure that our people are living in a much better conditions, that our people are parting from the Soviet past, that our people will, even though right now we are still very seriously feeling the economic decline that was in part caused by the Russian aggression as well. Notwithstanding all of this, we have already, by the end of last year, we have shown 2.4% of the growth of GDP, and that's extremely difficult when you've lost 20% of your economy to the war.
That's really good. If you'd allow me to come in here, because I am curious.
It's not a political decision.
Sure. If you'd allow me, and my apologies for interrupting because we're out of time. We're running out of time very fast, but I want to get this in because I am curious about what's going to happen with the East and Crimea, which was annexed by Russia. How does that work? If you're a Ukrainian citizen and you live in Crimea, if you're somebody in the East and you're a pro-Russian separatist, do you also have that visa-free travel to Europe?
Ukrainian citizens who have not violated Ukrainian legislation, who have not been recordedly participating in fight against Ukrainian state, and if you were not, according to the law, taken to prison, then you are absolutely ready and capable of getting Ukrainian biometrical passport, and you can use the possibilities of traveling to EU countries enjoying the visa-free regime. And so I hope that those Russian regulars who are on the East will not try to obtain Ukrainian passports and will not try to violate our internal legislation even further.
Okay, Emre Gönen, let me ask you what Turkey is going to do now, given the news of Georgia, given the news of Ukraine. How would President Erdogan be thinking now? He said last month that there's a new 12-month process. Would he be thinking, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to push the Europeans to give us visa liberalization? Or would he be looking at it as maybe the game is rigged and maybe we shouldn't bother?
I do not think that the gesture of the European Union towards Ukraine and Georgia should be instrumentalized by Turkey. Obviously, the Deputy Prime Minister has been talking about it. There are a conditionality period to be fulfilled, and Turkey has fulfilled this conditionality long ago with biometric passports, but there are still political issues that remain unsolved on the part of the European Union, and it's up to the European Union to decide whether this conditionality should be totally fulfilled or, as in the case of Ukraine, for instance, should be seen in a more flexible way in order to convey a very important message to those countries fighting for their independence, fighting for democracy. That's an issue. Second issue is that it's a very, perhaps, not so easy argumentation to talk about illegal humanitarian immigration. These people do not apply for visas, they do not have passports, they just try to escape from a certain death. So when they come to the frontiers of Europe, they don't have passports, they still cross the frontiers of Europe. We are talking mainly about Syria. These people had no place to go within Syria. They're all in Turkey.
And the refugees is a major hot potato issue here, especially as Brussels and Ankara talk. I understand. Ivana, I'm going to be losing your window in the next few seconds, so I'm going to wrap the discussion. It's been a pleasure having all your perspectives on Ivana Klimpish-Tsintsadze, Emre Gönen, and Nikolai Gorshkov. I thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.